Bitcoin and crypto. Can it actually make you what people call generational wealth? Well, let's consider some facts. It is a statistical fact that the Bitcoin and crypto market have seen tremendous returns, the likes of which we frankly have never seen before in any other asset or asset class or any market in history. That said, it is also a statistical fact that the vast overwhelming majority of people who create massive wealth have a problem. And that problem is when they pass on their wealth. People that inherit their wealth directly, the vast majority of them hold on to it for dear life because they know that there's a bit of a problem in that they may not have the same capacity to create wealth as the person or people before them that did. So the first generation of heirs usually manages to hang on to the wealth by being extremely conservative and managing the wealth. But they don't necessarily create more or generate new streams of wealth for the most part. Of course, there are always outliers, there are always exceptions. Some people do manage to create new wealth from the wealth they inherit, but most people actually don't. And then the second generation that inherits the wealth typically will think to themselves, well, I think I can do a better job. I can add to the wealth. And they believe that they are capable of it, and then they try. And sure enough, the majority of them fail. And so they start losing a little bit or a lot of their money. And usually, by the time the money passes on to the third generation, there's either very little or nothing left by the time it's passed on to the third generation, or the third generation itself manages to blow what remains of the wealth. So generational wealth, this myth that you can make a lot of money and that your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren and so on will be eternally wealthy, is a myth. It's not a real thing statistically. Each generation has to be able to create its own wealth by its own means. And yes, if you're fortunate enough to inherit something, that means that you too have to work hard at creating a successful means of revenue and wealth generation. Because, again, the statistics show that most people are not capable of doing that. And it's not always because they didn't work hard or they did work hard. There's a variety of reasons. But if you don't work hard, or if you don't try to make a difference in your wealth portfolio, then you probably will not succeed at it anyway. At the very least, if you don't invest it wisely and let the compounding interest create more wealth for you and you live below your means, well, then if you live above your means, you're going to be creating problems eventually. And you're going to be running out of capital. So that's the facts. Now, what can people do to make sure that they actually can create wealth in the age of Bitcoin and crypto? Say you manage to buy a big bag of some coin, whatever it might be. How can you make sure that your heirs will benefit from that in a practical way that will last them generations? Well, the first thing is education. Financial education. This is probably the most important thing. Because if you don't understand how finance works, if you don't understand how money works, there isn't a chance that your heirs will if you don't educate them, or if they don't get an education about it somehow. So that's the number one thing. Number two thing is invest in assets that generate wealth over time. This could be things like dividends. It could be things like staking certain cryptos that give you a yield every year. It could be things like buying and holding an asset that you believe is going to rise in value over time. And if it does, your portfolio keeps growing and everything's wonderful. But of course, if things start to go down, you need to know what to do, which comes back to education. For now, you can stake things like Ethereum. You can stake all kinds of different cryptos, Solana, whatever. Depends on the platform, depends on the offer for the crypto. You can't really stake Bitcoin right now, although there are services that allow you to stake your Bitcoin. They're not actually Bitcoin native staking. At some point, there may be native Bitcoin staking. That is certainly something that's being attempted by various groups who want to offer such services and products to people. Does that mean that those products and services will be a great success? No, certainly it does not necessarily mean that. It just means that there are companies that are trying to make those kind of products and services available because they believe it'll be able to let you have passive income in the sense of you hold an asset and it grows in value over time and it pays you some kind of payout on a monthly, quarterly, or annual basis, whatever it might be. That's one way to use Bitcoin and crypto to create wealth for yourself that you may pass on to your heirs. But again, the key to actual generational wealth all comes down to education. It's not about the assets you hold. It's not about the size of your portfolio. It's about financial education. And of course, it's about the connections you have in life. A lot of those things depend greatly on your context. The more connections you have in life, the better. The better quality connections you have in life, the better. If you have 10,000 connections, none of them are helpful in any way, shape, or form, well, then in terms like of helping you grow your finances, well, then those 10,000 connections may be the most wonderful people on earth, but they may not be able to help you do anything meaningful to grow your portfolio, and therefore it still relies entirely upon you. Whereas if you have a lot of connections, or even a few connections that are capable of helping you to learn more, to know what the right moves are to do, to understand the pros and cons of your position, well then those few connections may actually help you to grow your portfolio in a way that may actually benefit you and your heirs for generations to come. Right? What are some examples of wealth? Well, I will point to the Rothschilds. Okay, yes, the Rothschilds are still a very well-to-do family, although although their wealth as a family is nowhere near what it used to be because it got divided up over generations. However, at the core, they have been able to hold on to a significant amount, and they've been able to do that because of education. And more importantly, their word is their bond. They were always, since they entered the financial world, they were always people of their word. Meaning, if they gave you their word, it was as good as gold. That is why the Rothschilds became trusted by so many different rulers and leaders across different countries, even countries that were fighting each other at the same time. The Rothschilds were seen as neutral and trustworthy people with whom one could do business. And they passed that value on from the very progenitor of their financial dynasty to their children and children's children and children's children, and so on throughout the generations. And yes, in the last century or two, that began to change a lot as their family kept splitting up and splitting up the wealth and so on. But the core values that created that wealth remained the same: education and a good reputation or integrity of their family name are what mattered more than anything, more than any asset they invested in, more than any clients they had. It was their word, their integrity, their reputation as being people whose word was good that helped them create true intergenerational wealth by passing those values on from generation to generation. And that is the secret to creating true intergenerational wealth. Okay, I gotta go, folks. Talk to you later. Peace.